we go. How's that looking? Okay. Well, the Early Imprints Project. How do we know what was in the colonial mind? One way is through the books that they bought and kept. For the 19th and 20th centuries, European countries had started to keep lists of what was published, and others followed, and with the subsequent controls and tracks created by legal deposit, we've ways and means of finding out what books were produced. But for the period of printed books before this time, there's no way to know what was published and purchased without examining libraries and collections and bookseller stocks and their printed lists, their catalogues. The genesis of the Early Imprints Project in South Australia was within the major international efforts to address this shortfall in knowledge, a high point of which was the Short Title Catalogue, or STC. So if you're wondering why short title, often the periods that we're talking about were times when titles were asked to do a lot of work. And this one that you're looking at now is purely there for illustration. It hasn't even made it down to the authors, which is nearly as long. Short Title Catalogue. Actually, I think it's good now we can jump in and look at what the modern Short Title Catalogue looks like, which is the ESTC. So right there is a good explanation of what you're looking at. 1473, so not the very earliest days of printing, only things published before 1801, and 2,000 libraries. So let's just look at the libraries.
Richard, we're still seeing your PowerPoint slide.
Ah, I wonder how I can.
I think when you choose,
you just have to make it. You just have to make it take the focus off, don't you?
Yes, that's right.
Yeah, yeah. Remember, PowerPoint really likes to hang on to the show when it's running. I can track that now. Thanks. So the ESTC, the English.
Sorry, Richard. We're still seeing your PowerPoint, but just in presentation mode.
Oh, bugger.
I think you might need to switch which screen you're sharing.
I'm only on one screen. Well, at the moment, I have to turn off screen sharing. Oh, okay. Well, look, it is worth it just for this one thing, and I'll see if I can do it to get it back. I might need to get your help to get me back again. The reason why I wanted to show you this is this illustrates the Early Imprints Project, the libraries list. When I first looked at this libraries list, I was pretty surprised that it seemed to feature things which didn't seem like super grand libraries. And when you see the list, so if we follow one title in the catalogue and have a look at, are you able to see that still?
Yes, we are.
Okay. So when I saw this list of funny places, I had to say that I find this extremely surprising. This list of council libraries, private associations, institutes. Maybe most surprisingly, at the bottom of the list there is a private holding. So the English Short Title Catalogue then really does focus on location and holdings as a focus of it. There's things there in the list that I know don't even exist now. But when I saw this, I was really extremely surprised and asked the cataloguer at the State Library how such a thing could have occurred. And she said, EIPSA. I'll go back to my PowerPoint. Okay. So a major component of this type of catalogue is to show holdings so that researchers can track the progress of printed works across the planet and then possibly even attend these collections to meet these books in person. The STC was made by Pollard and Redgrave for the period 1475 to 1640. It was first released in 1926 and was followed by Donald Wing's STC for the next period, 1641 to 1700. It was first seen in 1945. As tools for historical inquiry, these were so valuable that the idea caught on, and just in Australia followed a short title list of 15th century printed books held in New South Wales, Queensland and the ACT in 1965. Short title catalogue of books 1701 to 1800 held in the libraries of the ACT in 1966. The short title catalogue of German imprints in Australia from 1501 to 1800 in 1970, and short title catalogue of 16th century printed books in New South Wales in 1979. So when Robert Rosenthal of the University of Chicago was in Adelaide and discussed the revision of Pollard and Redgrave currently underway and how it might include a list of Australian locations of copies or holdings, the idea fell on fertile ground. Alan Brissenden and Wilf Prest of the University of Adelaide had been discussing the idea of a catalogue. And in the wake of the new Anglo-American push to address the next century with the 18th century STC, an historians' conference in Adelaide in 1976 sent a motion to the National Librarian recommending compiling a list of local holdings for inclusion. But it was the Humanities Research Centre at the ANU which provided resources and $3,000 to start things off. Nationally, the essential involvement of the Bibliographic Society of Australia and New Zealand was secured, and at a meeting in October 1977, a council and executive committee chaired by Walt Kersop was formed, called the ANZIP, Australia and New Zealand Early Imprints Project, with contribution to the ESTC confirmed. ANZIP aimed to compile a list of all items published before 1801, no matter where or in what language, which are held in public and institutional libraries and in private hands for Australia and New Zealand. For Australia and New Zealand, it was anticipated this might be 150,000 items. Wilf Prest and Alan Brissenden represented locally in South Australia, and the rest of the South Australian committee who formed the research team for the project were from the academics, librarians and cataloguers of the State Library and the two universities. They convened with Alan as chair and planned a methodology to harvest holdings. In 1979, ARGC funding secured a well-qualified research assistant for the project, Cheryl Hoskin, and plans for funding a printed catalogue to accompany the project's outcome were already underway. Cards would be prepared and sent to the British Library and the ESTC, but at the same time the committee was looking into computerisation, which was really at the heart of the ESTC project. There's no huge excuse to show this picture of Ninette Ellis, but any excuse is good enough. By the end of 1980, Peter Nissen at the Barr-Smith Library had already led production of an online catalogue with 77,000 short records in MARC format accessible by computer terminal in the library. That's what this picture is of. The committee hoped that perhaps the cards could incorporate Peter Nissen's tape requirements and the Flinders University printing press could typeset from computer tape to produce a printed catalogue. This printed catalogue is mentioned throughout the records I accessed, from Australian Research Grant Scheme reports to the very generous praise accorded to the South Australian EIP effort by Wal Kersop, who saw the planned 1986 publishing of a printed catalogue as a crowning achievement.
Richard, that's 10 minutes.
So by 1979, the committee was hard at work handling books and filling cards, sending letters to country areas and newspapers, placing articles in local publications and newsletters, sending brochures to private collectors and approaching schools. The advertiser article there mentions Aquinas College, and this is remarked on by Alan in his Library Journal article, mentioning the notes of the researcher Cheryl Hoskin reporting that on the shelves in the staff common room, which was shared with students, apple cores and coffee stains, were 2 Incunabula and a hand-coloured first edition of Camden's Britannia, which is very magnificent. Data collection ceased in May 1983 with 18,332 holdings, recorded for 8,300 titles, including 793 from the period of Pollard and Redgrave's to 1640. Entering the places where books are stored and meeting book owners around the state must have been an extraordinarily lively and interesting experience for the researchers and an opportunity for owners to express their relationship to books. From Lady Hawker arriving at the Clare Institute with her covered basket and 13 volumes, to the Ecclesiastic Library, where the EIPSA researcher, on asking about the library arrangement, was told sternly that it was the most appropriate. On access to the collection, the researcher was stunned to find the books were arranged so that their spines formed a cross. And what of the printed catalogue? The long title. Early printed books in South Australia, a catalogue of books and other material printed before 1801, recorded by the Early Imprints Project of South Australia, edited by Alan Brissenden, compiled by Cheryl Hoskin. Any librarian listening already knows why the catalogue was not printed, as I did when I started looking for the catalogue's fate. In my head, I heard the librarian voices echoing, already available online, or out of date before it was printed. After years of work trying to secure funding and with catalogue essays mostly written and chapters and layout decided, the idea died. At a meeting for which the research assistant had prepared a list of likely purchasers of the catalogue, a truly pathetic list, the printed catalogue project was shelved. A really major pivotal change occurred during the Early Imprints Project. Analogue became electronic, and a catalogue of essay holdings would not join the list of great STCs produced in Australia in the 20th century. It went the same way as the 18th century Short Title Catalogue, which was not published except as a database with the same acronym, the English Short Title Catalogue, or ESTC, a truly fabulous union database of holdings of work published between 1473 and 1800 in Britain and its former colonies, notably those in North America and primarily in English, drawing on the collections of the British Library and other libraries in Britain and around the world. But I don't think that electronic is necessarily the be-all and end-all, as any catalogue is only as accurate as its last update. I'll close by saying that when I read in the unpublished EIPSA catalogue essay, reiterated in Library Journal, that the 1611 annal of the works of Spencer was discovered by the Early Imprints Project in the Simon collection at the State Library, I thought, well, if you'd care to look, it is in his catalogue. Thank you. I'll unshare.
So much, Richard. That was a fantastic survey of a sort of an important, but as you say, unrealized, in the end, unrealized project. We've got time for a couple of questions. So if anyone has one brewing, please do put it in the Q&A function. I guess, Richard, one thing that occurs to me, and of course in Victoria, we have our own stacks of Early Imprint Project cards floating around various places, including the SLV where I work. And I've started to wonder whether in some ways the cards themselves are now an object of bibliographic interest, even if the catalogue information itself might now be recorded elsewhere. The project as a whole could potentially be of interest for sort of digitization. And I wondered if that's something that you'd ever thought about in at your library.
I'm not aware if it has been thought of as an idea, but I feel maybe I've only ever been associated with really contact with the public parts of my library career, where I'm always driven to just work to the most efficient and expedient thing. And librarians, it's not that they have minds like ants, it's that formats get added. They never go away, and we're asked to deliver the same products in more than one format. And the money doesn't double, just the amount of work required by us doubles. But I do feel like that is the most amazing value of digitization is that it doesn't take up space. And if a thing is well preserved, which is another long story, it means that you can make access to more material. I think the cards themselves are pretty interesting, especially because there's so much location involved, because they often were filled out in the presence of the person who brought the books. A lot of the work was done by going into libraries, like at the college where they were arranged in shape of a cross. But a tremendous amount of it was by going to country towns and going to the hall, and people would come in with their books and the cards were filled out then and there. Sometimes they did actually have a portable photocopier, which I wouldn't mind knowing what that looked like. But otherwise they filled the cards out as they worked. So I think that there might have often, I wonder if there was input from the book lovers.